And a very warm welcome to our today's webinar about child protection and child rights with Dr. Judith Gates, who is joining us, Coaches Across Continents, today for this webinar, and will present a lot of content and give us an introduction about the different aspects of our work at Coaches Across Continents, since Dr. Judith is involved in a lot of activities around child protection and child rights. We are very delighted to welcome her today. Welcome, Judith, and thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Markus, and a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk to all of our partners, Coaches Across Continents.
Thank you. And so you also have a visual picture of the two people that are presenting to you today. I've put up a slide where you can see Dr. Judith at the program. She will say a few words in a second about it, and myself being also at a program in Armenia in that picture.
And the picture that you can see of me is at a program in Kigoma in Tanzania, taken very recently. You can also see that I'm working with Nick Gates, who many of you know, and also Nico. And it was an excellent program. And the session that I was working on in the picture that you can see was actually child rights and child protection.
Yeah, and as already previously mentioned, Judith is involved with a lot of activities within Coaches Across Continents. She is part of our team. She's part of the board of Coaches Across Continents, but also has been a lifelong educator, an international consultant throughout her professional career.
Thanks.
And I would go on towards the content that we will be covering today, talking about child rights and child protection. As mentioned already at the beginning in the introduction, we are active in a lot of different fields. And so we would like to start to present to you what Coaches Across Continents has achieved in regards to child rights and child protection over the past decade, we can say now, since we have celebrated our 10th anniversary in September. And also then in the second point, highlight a little bit the actions we have taken now this year in 2018. And part of that actions that we have taken this year also included feedback from our partners that we would also like to share to give you like an overview of the work that our partners are doing and the insights that they have from their communities. And then we will close this webinar with some ideas, inputs for you, what potential goals and potential pathways could be for your organization, for your community when it comes to peace and child rights. So let's get started right away with the first point or the first point of discussion. So I will hand over to Judith to give us an introduction about the achievements over the past decade in regards to child rights.
It's actually such a privilege to look at our achievements, and having been so involved in them right from the inception of Coaches Across Continents and the beginning of our work on child rights and child protection. For me, looking at the list of achievements is a reminder of how far we've traveled, how much has been done. It also, as always, reminds me of how much is left to do, but to celebrate kind of the achievements, I think, is quite important. Coaches Across Continents has arrived at a position in the world through our work with UNICEF and through our work in over 50 countries on child protection and child rights, where I think that we can claim to be a global champion. Child rights and child protection is very important to us, and so we have put a lot of energy and a lot of time into it. As always with our work, we like to base it on a clear rationale, a clear purpose to what we are doing. So our work in child rights and child protection is based on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, particularly Article 19, where children have the right to be free from all forms of violence, but also Articles 32 through to 36, where young people and children have the right to protection from sexual exploitation. So we've taken the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and used that as the foundation for our work with our partner groups, and supported our partner groups to also be basing what they do on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. We've been involved as a pioneering member of UNICEF's International Safeguards for Children in Sport project. And I remember probably 6, 7, maybe even 8 years ago, founder Judith Gates asked me if I would become a member of that particular group on behalf of coaches across continents. And we joined with interested parties from around the world who are working on sport for development, and worked with them from the inception to help develop a safeguarding policy that can be used by interested people around the world. As a result of that, we got a clearer picture of the necessity to safeguard children, and made the decision that we would run child protection workshops with all of our partner groups. So many of the people that I'm talking with today will be aware of those child protection workshops. We include in that a Bill of Rights for children. We talk about what coaches and teachers should always do and what they should never do. We highlight the problems that are encountered around the world that have necessitated the need for child protection. And we encourage people to become more aware in order to be able to prevent child abuse in their community, and also to know how to respond to it. That is often done as a classroom activity, but of course, as all of you know, our classrooms are not necessarily within the classroom. Often they are out on the field, and Markus can give some information about how that classroom activity translates into action with our curriculum activities and games.
Yeah, so as you can see on some of the pictures, there is a theoretical part to it, but as safeguarding children also obviously needs to be implemented on the field, we have activities that on the one hand can address specific aspects of child protection and of specific children's rights, including the right to education, the right to play, the right to privacy, and all the different children's rights that are listed in the Convention of the United Nations. So we have games that address these different rights on the field, and as well, we also are able to implement different games and our methodology that implements this way of protecting children and also coaching in a way that is enhancing the development of children.
So you can see our approach is very much aligned from a theoretical perspective to a practical perspective. And both of those aspects mesh very closely together to offer support to our partner groups for their work within the community. I wonder if you could go back to the earlier slide, Markus, for me, so I could say a little bit about our contribution to 3 UNICEF working groups. Following on from UNICEF creating the International Safeguards for Children in Sport document, they then wanted to work with interested groups such as coaches across continents to determine how best to ensure that that document was fully utilized around the world. And we at Coaches Across Continents wanted to be part of that bringing policy to action, something that we consider very important in our work generally. So we have membership of, I am a member of the 3 UNICEF working groups, looking first of all at advocacy of the safeguards, secondly at how the safeguards can be implemented, And thirdly, supporting, monitoring and evaluation of their effectiveness in order to make them even better wherever possible. So advocacy we have worked on quite extensively, and we'll be talking about that later in the webinar. Implementation comes through what Markus was talking about in the games that we have, and monitoring and evaluation is ongoing, both in our work at Coaches Across Continents and, of course, in our work with UNICEF. All of those things have come together, and recently we have publicized a document on peace and child rights. And we've brought together those two important concepts, both peace and child rights, because we think that child rights looks at protection of children, and that is absolutely crucial, that you reach a level where children are protected from abuse. But we recognize that when we introduce the word peace, we are looking at something which enhances the protection, where we're looking at something where within communities, children have the chance to grow and become all that they can be. So they're not just protected from danger, but they are supported to become contributing members of society, to recognize that they have rights, but also take responsibilities within their community. So that publication that brings together child rights with peace is around both protecting rights, but ensuring that children have the opportunity to develop responsibilities, community responsibilities, in a peaceful environment. Shall we move on, Markus, now to what Coaches Across Continents have been doing in 2018 in preparation for Universal Children's Day?
Yes, definitely. Just flipping over to the next slide. So we're seeing again the pictures from our talks and on-field activities that we do with all of our partners. And yeah, I think we have arrived at our next slide.
Indeed.
So I will hand over again to you, Judith, to take us through the actions we've taken in 2018.
Right, two threads to this. The first thread is the Coaches Across Continents approach to all of our partners. And we recognize that as a result of having workshops, as a result of having curriculum activities, our partners had arrived, many of our partners had arrived at a stage where they wanted to develop and create their own child rights, child protection policy. So the most crucial action that we took in 2018 was to offer support to all of our partner groups to help them create their own child rights, child protection policy. This was actually a development of our existing work. It was building on the platform, the foundation that we have from the work that we have done in the past, and it was taking the next step to develop safeguarding for children all around the world. The second strand to our actions was a result of our work with one of the UNICEF working groups, which is looking at advocacy of the UNICEF safeguards. The suggestion was that we use Universal Children's Day to promote the international safeguards for children in sport. So we brought together these two strands, these two threads, develop our work of Coaches Across Continents and build on what we'd done in the past, and support UNICEF in promoting the international safeguards for children in sport. And to bring both of those threads together, we circulated a monthly curriculum packet to address different forms of child abuse. This process was very well supported by our partners, and they were particularly interested in the monthly curriculum for Universal Children's Day, which we asked them to look at in connection with Universal Children's Day on November the 20th. Over to you, Markus, to talk a little more about that.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. So as we have done it throughout the year, we provided a monthly curriculum to all of our partners and facilitators. And for the first time this year, we have celebrated together with United Nations and partners around the world Universal Children's Day. And also partly that's the reason for this webinar, to review what has happened basically 2.5 weeks ago. And so we have developed games based on the different abuses that have been brought to us, the information that has been brought to us from our community members and implementing partners about the different abuses that they are facing. So you can see here now 2 screenshots from 2 of the games that were part of the curriculum. On the left, a game about making mistakes, and very often making mistakes is also related to emotional or mental abuse. And so we have addressed this topic through one of our games, how making mistakes can be seen more as a learning opportunity, as something that is part of learning, part of life, part of everybody's journey, instead of something that needs to be avoided or that needs to be punished. And on the right, you see a game about general child rights and the importance of educating children, knowing their rights that can foster their development. And we have developed three more games that have also addressed aspects of sexual abuse, verbal abuse, as well as physical abuse, because those 3 forms, as we will see on one of the next slides, have also been reported to us from our partners as issues in their communities and as forms of abuse that children are suffering.
Thank you, Markus. Coaches across continents didn't just want to promote child rights and child protection in a vacuum. We recognize the importance of it, and we recognize that we get a global picture from our work with UNICEF and from working with other groups around the world. But we have always been extremely interested in what our partners tell us. And so one of the actions this year, as I've just outlined, was getting in touch with partners and supporting them in working further on their own policy document for child rights. And in working on that, we wanted to support them in creating awareness about what was going on within their community. And we asked them to let us know. And the feedback and learnings from our partners will influence our future actions with our partners. And they are most important in terms of determining what Coaches Across Continents does next. What came through very strongly was that all forms of child abuse, namely physical, emotional, sexual, and verbal, were reported as being present in the communities in which our partners work. And in actual fact, the response to that was fairly evenly divided. We asked the question, which form of child abuse do you wish to address first? And these 4 forms were all named, and they were more or less around the 25, 28% each, so that there was an even spread of the 4 aspects, indicating that every aspect was present. Every form of child abuse was present somewhere with our partner groups. I'm going to jump to point number 3 on here, because it was also reported to us that there's widespread sexual abuse within communities, and that obviously is of significant concern. But a thread that came through was particularly when we look at physical or verbal abuse. The message we received was that culturally, discipline is often based on physical violence or verbal abuse. It's a cultural norm as distinct from an imposition of power by a coach or a teacher in the absence of it being a cultural norm. And that, of course, then requires a way of thinking about it that considers cultural behaviors and whether they are actually in the best interests of the children. And so that to us is an important learning from our partners, because it indicates that there is not a generally accepted perspective that physical violence or verbal abuse is a problem, even although the UN information on the rights of a child would indicate that it is, but that in many communities around the world, it's still a cultural norm. And that, of course, is a source of future discussion and work with our partners. If we then look at other learning that came from our partners on the next slide, over to you, Markus, on moving the slides.
Mm-hmm. And probably I can also add at this point, at the point you just made about the physical violence and verbal abuse, to also look at the point. Now, unfortunately, I've moved already a slide, but there was the word discipline in it. And I think what we do at Coaches Across Continents during our programs and during the discussions that I'm also leading when running programs is to also look behind the behavior and the actual action and ask more of like, okay, are there other ways to achieve a goal that might be worthwhile? Let's say, for example, discipline, I think is something that has value, but questioning the ways it can be achieved and possible side effects by the actions that are taken. Let's say, for example, physical abuse or verbal abuse that is used in order to achieve discipline, and then get into a discussion and thinking of different pathways, different ways to achieve a commonly accepted good goal or character threat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Markus has hit on an important point there in the sense of intention, because cultural discipline, when it's often based on physical violence or verbal abuse, is actually often done with good intentions, with I wish the children to grow up to behave, I want them to be respectful of adults, and so on. And so the intention is good, but the outcome, the result of it, may actually be detrimental to the child and not achieve the objective that was intended. And I think that that is what our partner groups meant when they said communities need to raise awareness about child rights, that communities need, and these are their words, these are words that came to us. If awareness of children's rights is clearer, if people have a clearer understanding of them, then they will consider different ways to achieve what they're seeking to achieve, rather than utilizing physical violence because it has been the way in which they were disciplined. Which naturally leads to the final point on this slide, which is adults should be educated about alternative ways of working with young people. And we encounter that perspective quite often because our partners say to us, well, if we don't shout at children, verbally abuse them, or physically abuse them, how will they ever learn? What other ways do we have of working with young people in order for them to learn the outcomes that we think they need to know in order for us to achieve the objectives that they want? And what was coming through in the response from our partner groups was that the alternative ways of working with young people should be founded on respect and conflict prevention and the avoidance of bullying. I personally think that that probably comes from the perspective that says that children learn what they live. And if children and young people experience bullying or physical abuse as children, research would tell us that those are the methods that they then use when they're seeking to discipline from the position of being adults. And so to break that abusive cycle requires increased awareness on child rights and also requires support and education about alternative ways of working with young people. What do you think, Markus?
Yes, I completely agree with that aspect, and I think also seeing that these young children, as you just mentioned, will be the next adult generation. So also thinking of how we behave towards children they will learn to behave also later on towards each other, or even as children to behave towards each other, or to relate to other humans in general. So I think there also we can see the importance and the impact a coach, a teacher, an adult can have on a child, because these adults are the people who are the role models for the children, and their behavior, their social interaction, how they relate to each other, and yeah, how they may relate also to children later on when they are grown up.
Yeah, I think a crucial message that I absorbed as a very young educator a number of years ago is that children learn from what you do, not from what you say. And so, therefore, they, as you have used the phrase, Markus, they see adults as role models, they internalize behavior of adults. And if the words of an adult are contradictory to their actions, children will note that, but they will still take on board the actions as distinct from the words. So if we wish to break the cycle of utilizing physical violence as a disciplinary measure, then we actually have to stop the physical violence and find alternative strategies for working with young people so that as they grow up, they will utilize those strategies. And that leads really to a core question that you posed to me a couple of days ago, Markus, which is, what do we want to achieve with our young people? And for example, we would all say child safety and child protection. And our project from Coaches Across Continents, together with UNICEF, has been very much focused on child protection and child rights. But when Coaches Across Continents has moved to look at peace and child rights, we see that that needs to be enhanced so that children are not just protected, but are given the opportunity to develop personal capabilities. I've mentioned responsibility earlier. A sense of self-esteem is crucial. The capacity to have lifelong learning skills. All of those are part of our Coaches Across Continents curriculum, and they enhance the growth of children whilst at the same time protecting them from abuse. I'd welcome your comments on that, Markus.
Yeah, I can definitely support that, since I mentioned earlier, like our curriculum is having on the one hand particular games that address child protection, child rights, but at the same time also focus on different coaching techniques, on different, I would even say more than techniques, also is like a position, like a value system, that a coach has, an approach towards children. It's a mentality. I think that's a word that describes it the best, that we have towards working with children. Do we want them to grow? Do we want them to explore? Do we want them to try out new things? Do we want them to smile? Do we want them to be happy? I think that's also this whole aspect of like what learning environment do we create, and from research we also know that we all as humans, not just children, learn the best if we are in a relaxed mode, if we are not under stress, if we are not under extreme pressure, if we are not afraid, if we are not scared, if we are happy, if we are smiling. That's the best. That's the best learning environment in order to learn new skills, in order to build self-esteem. So I think there, in that aspect, the mentality of the coach plays such a crucial role. And I think the aspect you mentioned with the children, they learn far more from the attitude, from the atmosphere they experience, than from the words that they hear from the coach or teacher or adult.
And Markus has so clearly there described what we refer to as a safe space, a place in which young people feel safe, where a place of peace a place of collaboration, a place where people can talk with each other. And when we look at cultural assumptions, a place in which they can question the previously taken for granted. Look at it and say, is this the way in which we want things to be in the future? And so that safe space supports the growth of children and the development of children. It supports the growth and the development of coaches and teachers. And it leads to not just child protection, but enhancing the possibility of children growing to be all that they could become. So it's quite an important aspect. And from Coaches Across Continents perspective, something that is crucial, so that we are not just protecting children from, although that is an essential foundation, but we are enhancing all that they can become. This all sounds very desirable, and the challenge often of achieving it is significant. And the UNICEF safeguarding document, together with the support that Coaches Across Continents is able to give, will help outline potential pathways for our partner groups. I would first of all suggest, if you haven't done it already, that you download UNICEF's International Safeguards for Children in Sport, and we've given the web locator here. There's a particular structure to this approach, and many of these words have been threaded through our presentation today. This document helps you create your child rights policy by supporting you to raise awareness. Many of you have already done this in responding to us about what is going on within your community. And you've also embarked on a self-audit. You've turned your eyes very closely to your community and recognized what needs to be done. Some of the acknowledgement of what needs to be done is challenging and difficult to actually want to see. Aspects such as sexual abuse within communities are very distressing, but the self-audit is necessary in order to see clearly what needs to be done. And the safe space that you create, together with Coaches Across Continents, helps that to be achieved. The self-audit is more likely to take place effectively within a safe space. The International Safeguards for Children in Sport then help partner groups develop their policy and put their policy into action. They have some specific suggestions, they pose some particular questions, they support the process of developing a strategic plan for what you wish to do with your child rights, child protection policy. So I very much encourage our partner groups to utilize these international safeguards for children in sport, knowing that they have been created by people from around the world who are committed to being part of the solution, who are committed to being champions for children, who are committed to making the world a better place for young people, and to help work on the UN child rights policy to ensure that that becomes something that is implemented around the world. So I encourage you to do that. You have your contacts with Coaches Across Continents, your SDL coaches. Get in touch with them if you have any queries. Get in touch with Markus or I if you have any queries. But this is a tremendous resource for helping you to move even further in the work that you're doing to safeguard the children in your community.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that a few logistical things in terms of the link. It will also be posted either below or above the video post. So please check the comments field so where you can then directly click on the link and don't need to type up every single letter from this link that you see on this PowerPoint. And I think also in terms of the content, I would like to add, I think that that's why it's so crucial to develop a child rights policy that is relevant to your cultural and local context, because the situations around the world are also different, and the issues may be different, as well as the attitudes and the cultural context. A few days ago, when we prepared this webinar with Judith, we have spoken about the cultural differences when it comes to children's attitude, but also the way we raise children, and how in societies like in the United States, or partly also in European countries, it sometimes can even turn and move into a way where children are put so much into the focus and individual in such an individual focus, that the aspect of responsibility that we have mentioned earlier gets completely lost, and children learn to think only about themselves, only about their own needs, their own desires. And where in other contexts, it might mean that children are deprived of the right to express their own desires, their own opinion. And so I think this presentation and this webinar gives a general overview and introduction, but definitely requires a lot of work in communities and a lot of sensitivity to see what the actual needs are in your community, where we as coaches across continents, and we as the process consultants, the SDL educators, can assist you and support you to identify these fine tunes, and these specific conditions and circumstances.
My final words on this, while agreeing wholeheartedly with what Markus has just said, is to encourage you to be a champion for children. At a recent CAC program where I was working, we had a conversation about what needed to be done within the community on child rights. And both young people and teachers and coaches outlined some steps that they thought that they could take. And I summarized at the end and said what great ideas, and how their community would be a better place for the young people if they were able to take some of these steps. And my final words were, it's up to you. You are the only ones who can change your community. If you've identified what you want to do, be brave. And I had the most wonderful moment at the end of that program, when a young woman came up to me and she put her arms around me. She gave me a hug. She kissed me on the cheek, and she said to me, "Mama Judith, I will be brave." And so I think my words really to everybody are, it's up to you. It begins with you. If you want to be a champion for children and to protect them and to enhance their lives, you are the ones who can do it, but it will require action. And I do encourage you to be brave.
Thank you, Judith, for these final words. And thank you to everyone who has taken the time to watch this webinar. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for being a champion for children by watching this webinar, by showing interest in this topic, by ensuring safety for children when they are doing sport, when they are in your care. And we wish you good luck and all the best when ensuring children's rights in your community and beyond. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you.